Yeah.
We'll try to.
Yeah.
Okay. Let's get started. Natalie, why don't we ask you to go first? Please introduce yourself, state your party affiliation, and tell us, we know, but people who are watching don't, tell us what office you are seeking.
My name is Natalie Paravicini, and I'm running for Secretary of State under the Green Party and Progressive Party banners. And you want my bio?
Yeah, where'd you grow up?
Where I grew up in South America, in Caracas. I'm of mixed background. I'm American, obviously, since I can run for office. Professionally, I'm a naturopathic doctor. I work a lot with very complex illness, and a large part of my population is the Medicaid population. I have a varied background. I've covered infrastructure development in South America and in a previous business life.
What was that business like?
I was an associate publisher of a construction equipment magazine.
Okay.
I'm a long-time community organizer, and one of the main reasons why I'm running for Secretary of State is because I've been very involved with campaign finance reform and electoral reform, also in Texas, but in Oregon, and that is the key issue that I want to raise with the race.
How long have you lived in Oregon?
Since 2017.
Okay. What brought you here?
I chose to come here
Okay.
because my family migrated to the United States, but I think that Portland is one of the few states that's sustainable and livable,
Okay.
particularly Portland.
Since you've moved to Oregon, what kind of civic engagement or activity have you had?
Most of my civic engagement has been through the Green Party, community organizing, but also through the Honest Elections campaign, particularly campaign finance reform and ranked choice voting.
Just for people who may not know, can you tell us a little bit about Honest Elections?
Honest Elections is a group, it's a coalition of various organizations that include the Green Party, the Progressive Party, but also the League of Women Voters, Common Cause. I think somebody from PIRG is involved, a public interest group, and several community organizations that are interested in good governance, basically. And it includes also several attorneys who are basically cutting edge in terms of campaign finance reform across the country. They network with people across the country. So.
Okay, great, thank you. Treasurer Reed.
I'm Tobias Reed. I have the honor of serving as State Treasurer, and I'm the Democratic nominee for Secretary of State. I'm also an Oregonian by choice. I came here for college at Willamette and have more or less stuck around with a couple of exiles in Washington and both Washingtons, Washington, D.C. and Seattle. And I'm really, I was thinking about anticipating how we might start our conversation today, and obviously there have been some things that have happened since we worked together for the primary election. But for me, the argument is pretty similar still. I think as I've watched the Secretary of State's office while I've been Treasurer, we've really seen a lot of turnover and a lot of instability, and I think that has distracted from the kinds of work that Oregonians count on the Secretary of State for. And I want to bring the stability and the professionalism that we've built at Treasury to the office of Secretary of State. I feel like obviously the confidence that people have in government generally, but particularly in elections and in audits, is suffering, and I want to make sure that we are bringing that dedication and that persistence to those important tasks.
Okay. Tell us a little bit about your background. We know you, but people watching may not.
Sure. I was born in Montana and raised in Idaho. I have two parents who were very clear that I was benefiting from people who had invested in young people, that public schools and soccer leagues and libraries don't happen spontaneously, and they encouraged me to find ways to pay some of that back. And I really embraced that. Went to Willamette, as I mentioned already. Really felt that call to public service, and found a number of ways to help in that way. took some of the lessons that I learned there and worked in Washington, went to business school, worked at Nike, worked in the legislature, served in the legislature for 10 years, and have had a really enjoyable and I think productive run as state treasurer, which sadly is coming to an end in just a few months.
So you've been very critical in the past month of the Secretary of State's office. We've had a situation where the Oregon Department of Motor Vehicles discovered that it had mistakenly registered
Yes.
a number of people to vote who shouldn't have been on the rolls, and that 9 of those people voted. So why have you been critical of the Secretary of State's office, seemingly more than the DMV?
Because that's what the Secretary of State's office, I think the Secretary of State's office has not done an adequate job in ensuring that the work of the DMV was up to standards. It is ultimately the Secretary of State's office that has the responsibility for ensuring that voter rolls are complete and accurate, and I don't think they clearly did enough of that. I'm glad that we found this out. I'm appalled that it happened in the first place. And now I think the Secretary of State's office needs to make sure that the DMV is following through on the changes that they have articulated, because any number above 0 gives credence to people that are trying to undermine confidence in our election systems. We have a first-rate system, but we should be doing everything we can to make sure that people understand that and have confidence in it.
So your view is that although they're separate agencies, that SOS should have essentially gone to DMV and said, show us your process, we want to be sure that we're confident in it.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay. Do you have any thoughts about this issue that has arisen over the past several weeks?
No, I agree. I think it's a good thing to encourage people and make it easy to register to vote, to increase participation. But ultimately, that's the responsibility of the Secretary of State.
Okay. In your voters pamphlet statement, you alluded to some concerns that you have about the campaign finance law that the legislature passed recently after years of inaction. So tell us what your concern is about the new campaign finance law.
Yeah, so it's not years of inaction. We've had years of action and roadblocks at the very end from people who normally are allies. But the biggest concerns, there's two major areas of concern in the upcoming law. The first one is the lack of full disclosure of independent expenditures, and that was basically a concession to labor unions, 501c4s, but that needs to be closed because most of the money is going to go through independent expenditures once there are caps. And the other major concern, and that's why it's so important to the role of the Secretary of State is so important, is that if we allow, there's another area which is an area that we would call proliferation, like multiplication of efforts. So right now, for example, the law allows a membership organization to pay for staff and for campaigns, right? But it doesn't mention how many staff persons and who is allowed, who can be hired. So that can amount to hundreds of thousands of dollars. Mm-hmm. And so that wouldn't really be counted as part of the limits. And the other, so that's one area that really needs to be capped, because we're big supporters of 501c4s and efforts to support really grassroots or minority organizations, but it cannot be a floodgate. And the other one is the proliferation of membership organizations. Like somebody with a lot of money can create a lot of organizations and then basically totally undermine the law. So there needs to be some limits to that, because if you allow any loophole, the people who are going to benefit or to take advantage of that are the people who have deep pockets. Okay. So those are the two major areas of concern.
Tobias, do you have thoughts or concerns about the new campaign finance? Because whoever wins this race will be responsible for enforcing it.
Right. There's a lot to say here. I think that I'm pleased that we are making progress on this. I think people there's a lot of consensus around a desire to reduce the influence of money in politics. So I'm glad we're making progress. But I think you both made a really good point. One of the worst outcomes would be a bad implementation following the passage of this legislation. So that's a place that I'm really looking forward to diving in, and where the experience of being treasurer, I think, plays, because we've done that in lots of places where we've taken a complicated concept that hadn't been implemented and really focused on making it work and delivering results for people. That also brings to mind, I think, I think it's a virtual certainty that even if the implementation goes perfectly, that the next Secretary of State will need to come back to the legislature and seek further refinements and improvements and so on. There's lots of examples of where we've done something initially and then found that we didn't get exactly right. We want to make sure that is possible following good implementation. So I'm looking forward to it.
Willamette Week's written a number of times about the backlog of elections complaints, and I don't know if either of you have looked at that issue. I'd be interested in hearing your thoughts about how to lessen that backlog and how to deal generally with complaints. You go first.
Well, I think maybe starting with the last part of your question, dealing with complaints they need to be dealt with consistently and fairly. And I think that the capacity in the Secretary of State's office is certainly a part of what has led to that backlog. And having the earning and maintaining the confidence of the legislature so that we can add to that capacity is part of that. It reminds me of the experience we've had with unclaimed property, which was at the Department of State Lands. We brought it to Treasury, sought additional resources from the legislature, and have brought down dramatically the time for people to be reunited with their property. We revamped and remapped processes and are delivering much better results. So deal with complaints fairly and consistently, and make sure that we have the resources to do it quickly.
So one of the things that we are both beneficiaries, and people file bullshit election complaints all the time.
Yeah.
And they do so to get people like Lucas and me to write stories about them. And so I guess part of the question is, how do you, when we've talked to the Secretary of State's office and said, gee, how can you have 500 complaints, or it's much more than that now.
Yeah.
Part of the answer is a lot of those complaints are not serious or not legitimate complaints. So what do you do about that?
I think you'd have to have a specific process that indicates that says these we can give a quick answer to, and perhaps there's an appeals process or those sorts of things. But on first blush, your complaint does not appear to be serious. We're going to need more evidence. We're going to need something to substantiate this. Get back to us if you have it. We'll move on to the ones that are more substantial.
Okay. Your thoughts on election complaints?
500 is quite a lot of them.
No, they have a lot more. I forget what it is now. It was 500 some time ago.
Yeah. I think that there must be a process to vet, what are serious complaints and what are very likely spurious complaints, and just really focus on what appears to be, have some criteria to identify those that need to be processed with priority, because then the other ones, they'll just kind of fall off pretty easily.
Yeah.
Hopefully having good implementation of campaign finance reform and electoral reform and elections is very important. So having very clear guidelines that make it that set some minimum standards to file complaints is important. I have to share that my experience as a community organizer is that the Secretary of State, like in the petitioning area, have implemented lately a lot of requirements for petitions and petitioners that, in my opinion, are superfluous and just add to the administrative part and are not necessary. So maybe seeing also areas in the business of the Secretary of State where it's either it's not a political thing, but it might be politically motivated or not really necessary, and to streamline those.
One of the most important functions of the Secretary of State's office is the audit function. So in the past decade, we saw Dennis Richardson, the late Dennis Richardson, who was a very aggressive user of the audit function. He was almost responsive to headlines or responsive to concerns that came up in the legislature, and I think he tried to his credit, to be more responsive to what might be happening, that there's a risk there, of course, that you're too responsive to what's happening. Then we saw former Secretary Fagan, who appeared to be letting a key campaign contributor influence her audit decisions around the OLCC. So I'd like to hear your philosophies on how the Secretary of State, who's an elected official, should be interacting with a team of auditors who are supposed to be divorced completely from politics and political considerations.
Yeah.
Natalie, I'll let you go first, please.
I'm quite biased into this as a naturopathic doctor and a doctor, and so I would prioritize areas of the Oregon life and Oregon economy that have problems. I know, for example, as a doctor, I would prioritize areas in healthcare because some of the absurdities that as a doctor I have to deal with every day, and I'm not exaggerating, is every day we have 2 or 3 things that we have to do that are completely a waste of resources. And
Give us a couple of examples, please.
Well, the one example that just really that I find incredible is there is this one medication that is very effective for a condition that's very frequent, very common, and that medication costs in the United States $2,000 for 42 pills. So I have to send my patients through Canada to get 100 pills for $156. That, in my estimation, but like when you deal with Medicaid or Medicaid efforts, is unacceptable. The type of prior authorizations and administrative and little things that we have to do also is a big hindrance. And I don't have any specific example in mind because they are so numerous that every day I have to talk to a patient. Yeah, no, it's a little bit, I'm sorry, I can't do this because of this and that. The whole credentialing also, and the insurance and the plans, and every year they change and the plans changes. So every year, at the end of the year, we have to reconfigure everything, and patients lose their care. There's no continuity of care the first 2 months of the year, especially for Medicaid or things like that. Like people lose their providers and they have to seek providers. So it's just that also is kind of unacceptable in terms of an effective healthcare system that delivers to the Oregonians.
Okay. Tobias.
So I think the audit function plays at least 2 really important roles. One is uncovering performance, whether bad or good, that we want to avoid or replicate and expand. And the other is building confidence amongst legislators, taxpayers, Oregonians. And so I think the thing that the Secretary of State needs to do is establish the criteria and the process by which those decisions are made, and let audit professionals follow that data where it leads. We have an audit team at Treasury, and I've been really proud of the work that has resulted from that, because we say here are our priorities, here are our processes, go figure out what happens. And so as I think about this in the context of the Secretary of State, making sure that we're not, you put it well in your question, Nigel, that there is a tension to be navigated between responsiveness to things that are emerging, but also having a plan that is not buffeted by politics. I don't want an audit plan that is based on predetermined agendas or an agenda of weaponization. I think a lot about criteria, and there are 3 that are top of mind for me, and I'll give you examples of each of them. One is where are we spending a lot of money and not getting the results that we want. I think a good example of that would be housing, and affordable housing particularly. I doubt anyone would dispute that we put a lot of resources there. Are we getting the results that we want? Are there pieces of that are working better than others? Second would be, where do we have a history of poor results? An example of that might be IT, information technology. a history of not exactly what we wanted, and certainly it would be hard to argue that the IT is going to become less important in years to come. The third one for me is any place, frankly, where the state is stepping into a role of direct responsibility for individual lives of Oregonians, thinking particularly around foster care or people who are incarcerated. It would be, I think, irresponsible and premature to say this program or that thing right now before a real process that surveys those things and says where are we going to get the most bang for our buck. And then the last point, I think, that is sometimes missed in this is that while the Secretary of State has the authority to decide on audits and conduct them, most of the time the decisions about what to do with those findings are not the Secretary of State's. So having an intentional and deliberate plan to make sure that those findings are in front of decision makers, whether that's legislators or school board members or local government, I think is a really important piece of how we build confidence in the findings and in government more generally.
So do you think, we have had a lot of turnover in the Secretary of State's office for a variety of reasons. Do you think that the audit function, that the office has been using the audit function as effectively as it could have?
No, I think there is room to improve, absolutely.
So part of what we've seen over time is you could think of something like payments. That we've seen that audit over and over again where the state does a poor job of collecting money that's owed
Yes.
to it. We've seen a number of very negative DHS audits over time.
Mm-hmm.
So, and you touched on this, but I'd like to hear a little bit more. So, when you see repeated negative audits of an agency or of a function and nothing changes, it makes you think the audit's not doing as much as it could. So how do you have greater impact as the audit office is responsible for audits?
Two things occur to me immediately. One is, as a matter of standard operating procedure, every time I think it would be important to have a component of an audit that includes the perspectives of people who are doing the work on the front lines. I think that will make the audit more relevant.
You mean at the agency that's being audited, or the auditors?
No, where the work is happening at the agency level. That has, I think, can be used inconsistently. But if, as a matter of course, you say, what are the perspectives of the people who see the clients, who are interacting with Oregonians who are being served, who are, a direct perspective. They may not agree with the findings, but at least it's informed by that. I think that increases the likelihood that the findings would be relevant and actionable, and that the agency could deal with them. And as I sort of alluded to before, I think the Secretary of State can be a visible and vocal presence with legislators or school board members or whomever, saying, this is what we found. You need to make sure that you have a response to that. Again, we might not agree with the response, but much like we've talked about in the investment context, we come to different conclusions, but it's important to make sure that the relevant information is part of that process. And I would work to cultivate and maintain the relationships I have with those budget writers and policymakers.
So as we've gone through this cycle of endorsement interviews, I think we hear from a lot of people at the state and local level that Oregon is really underperforming. State with great potential, great resources, relatively small population that actually is relatively affluent. I mean, our per capita income has really increased relative to other states over the past decade. So to what degree does this audit function, have a role in trying to help Oregon do better? So we could look at things like K-12 education. The Secretary of State is not involved in education. However, our educational system is underperforming. So what's the role?
I think it's shining a light on those things. I think it is very much along the lines of the criteria that I talked about. I mentioned housing as an example, but education absolutely fits in that role, in that category too. We're spending a lot of money there, and I don't know too many people. There are pockets of positive developments and momentum, but certainly I don't know many people who would say I'm getting exactly what I want for my tax dollars from public education. So I think it is too easy to just say more money. that might be part of it. Certainly, I'm persuaded by the idea of stability in funding, but the Secretary of State has a role to say, here are the outcomes according to the measures we've identified. Here are the inputs. What is in between, and how are we making those decisions? It won't be the Secretary of State saying this is how the agency will run, or any of the 197 independently elected school boards. But being able to connect those is a role that the Secretary of State can play, and I think uniquely so because of that independence. Because as an independently elected person, can be much more objective about it.
I think that you mentioned about making sure that the people that are the agencies that are audited, or that group that is audited, participates, is an important point in what you're saying. I think that establishing more relationships, or cultivating the relationships with community organizations, would probably strengthen the effect of an audit. If you have people who on the other side know about the audit and are able to push for it with the legislators, because it's not just a relationship with your legislators, it's like having that community involvement.
In the past, Oregon has been known as a very easy place to establish a corporation, and a lot of bad actors have taken advantage of that. And I know there have been some efforts to try and reduce our role as sort of a mini Nevada or mini Delaware. What's your perception of where we are on that?
I think we've got work to do. I think we want to strike the right balance of making it an attractive and easy, convenient place for legitimate corporations. And so I've had a number of interesting conversations with businesses around the state who, not surprisingly, don't have a lot of fun chasing rulemaking and regulations and those sorts of things in lots of different parts of state government. So I think the Secretary of State's role in the Corporation Division particularly can help be a more single point of contact for that. And making sure that we're following up, that corporations are in fact legitimate, that they are not concealing ill intent or people or any of the rest of that. That's a real issue, and I think there's work to be done there.
I should have prefaced that question by explaining to people who are watching that the Secretary of State registers corporations under its Corporation Division, and that business registry is a very important source of information. It's also a place where everybody who wants to do business in Oregon has to register.
That's right.
To do business legally.
That's right.
What if you could change one thing about the way this office operates now, the Secretary of State's office? What would you change?
Because it deals with different areas, right? But one of the, in terms of what we were just talking about of registering businesses, one of the things that because I've run for Secretary of State in the past, that I have advocated is for the Secretary of State office to play more of a role of communicating with other agencies and ruling bodies to facilitate the operation of small businesses, because right now you have to chase paperwork in different areas, and it's not, they don't communicate with each other. So that's a very important role to make the office much more effective, and also it would probably catch much easier bona fide businesses from things that are just hanging out there or not really doing a good job. So that's one thing. And another thing that I had advocated in the past is in terms of the audits is that there were quite a few problems with internet and not internet, but computer software. And so I'm glad that you're mentioning that doing an audit of software and computer systems is very important to make the Secretary of State office much more effective and the state much more effective. I think that communicating more with the public and being more, making sure that the public knows that the Secretary of State is a very strong tool for the public is very important as well. So what I would do is streamline areas where there's too much administrative work, focus on the major areas like healthcare, housing, healthcare are very intertwined.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
How about you, Tobias? One thing that you would like to see the office do better?
I thought I had, well, you changed it. You said how it would change,
Okay.
and then how it would do better. They're related, of course. I thought I had a crisp, tight answer, and then listening, there's all these other ideas and things I keep thinking about, so it's a challenge. But I think if I had to pick one, I would talk about having more capacity in the audit division, because that plays such an important role across every part of anywhere state government spends money, and having the ability to be both consistent and responsive and substantive would I think open up a lot of other possibilities too.
So there's a ballot measure that voters will decide on in November that would introduce ranked choice voting statewide for state and federal offices. How will you vote on that and why?
The Green Party was very instrumental in bringing this with many other people in the state and across the country, and I would definitely vote for it because ranked choice voting allows more voices to be heard. You're not afraid of voting for the lesser of two evils. If I vote for this one, then this other person wins. But it allows much more debate focused on the issues because I want my opponents, supporters, to rank me number two. So it lessens mudslinging and really focuses. It allows a place for new ideas to be brought up in a very effective way. What I would do is also try to help lower, like county level, local level, implement ranked choice voting because it would get much more engaged in the political process.
When you tell people who don't know anything about ranked choice voting and they say, well, where's it really worked? What's the shining example of where ranked choice voting has really made a positive difference?
Gosh, I'm not the wonk on that and I don't keep up, but I believe that in New York, London, New York, there are different countries and different major cities that have elected people using ranked choice voting, and it's worked. I mean, it works. There is no. Like for example, in Alaska, we had also the surprise win in Alaska, right? Yeah. So it really allows new voices and independent voices to have a voice. So that's really the more important one.
Tobias, how will you vote and why?
I'm going to vote for it, but I have. I'll tell you more about my thinking on this. I think anytime we can make it more, we can help people feel like the nuances of their preferences are better reflected in their votes. That's a good thing. But I think it's going to be really important to again focus on how to implement it well. I've talked to about 25 of the 36 county clerks now, and on my second or third conversation, I sort of noticed a trend, and I decided to conduct a very unscientific experiment. So I didn't bring up ranked choice voting in any of my conversations with these clerks, but every one of those clerks brought it up, and they are concerned about how to implement it well, whether they have the time, the resources, and as a lot of people have pointed out, what the experience is going to be like for voters. Will they be able to have the stamina to go through that on multiple races, potentially different rules in different races? I'm going to be fascinated to find out after this election. I want to compare the statewide result on Measure 117 statewide with the result inside the city of Portland, who, having just gone through that process, might have a very different opinion about that. I think that difference might be really interesting.
Okay.
I mean, I think it's really unique in Portland just because of the number of people that are going to be elected. So it's and for the one kind of office.
Sure, and that's going to be the question. So will those folks say, this was great, I'm going to vote for
it's the
it?
challenge.
Or are they going to say, I did not like this and I'm voting no on 117? So it'll be interesting.
So Secretary of State obviously is the Secretary of State, as with all statewide officials who represent all Oregonians. Tobias, you're a Democrat. Democrats run this state from top to bottom. Give us an example of a policy issue on which you have been independent and which you have had to say no to the powerful Democratic special interest groups who control much of what happens in the state.
Well, I didn't know it at the time when I was in the legislature, but it turns out that my vote on some of the PERS reforms I did not, obviously I did know that that was not popular amongst labor, but I felt like it was an important piece of how we were going to set the state up for financial stability in the future. Now, as treasurer, I think that was a tough decision, particularly because of the way that people had their understandings. But I've said to everybody, there's a 100% chance that I will do something that will disappoint you at some point. But I want to have the kind of relationship where I'm working hard not to surprise you, and when we disagree on something, we can continue to talk about that. That's why I'm proud to have a lot of support from labor. I'm proud to have support from people like Newt Buehler and Kim Wallen and AgPAC, and I think it's about substance and our approach.
I didn't realize Kim Wallen had endorsed it.
This week.
So those were the Kitzhaber reforms, many of which were overturned by the courts. Any regrets, given that you took a hard vote and saw them overturned by the court, or substantially overturned by the courts?
Well, I'm using that less as an example on the substance and more as an example of the process that I use and used, which is to talk about principles that I try to hold to and not surprise people.
Yeah.
So there are other examples too. I think we could easily put everyone else to sleep if we get into the PERS discussions, but for me that's just an example.
Okay. Natalie, same question. You're running on the the Green Party and the Progressive Party line. If you are to win, you would serve Republicans as well. So is there a place where you could say, look, here's a place where I have disappointed my friends and been independent?
I think as long as you're always very clear and willing to listen to the other and engage with the other, your choice is your choice. And as long as you have ethics and behave according to your ethics, you can always be upset with a friend, but you cannot fault them for being true to what they believe.
Okay. All right, I think we're out of time since our third fellow didn't show up. We have a fun question for every candidate at the end of every interview this year. It's what were you known for in high school, best known for. So we had a guy yesterday who stole an El Camino. We had a couple of people.
These are city council candidates?
Yes.
We'll have to read the issue.
Keith Wilson, who was the worst basketball player on his varsity team. Another guy who was the worst soccer player on his team, didn't play a minute his whole senior year.
That's disappointing.
So, but some people who are, valedictorian are most likely to succeed. So, Natalie, what were you known for in high school?
I have no idea. I grew up in Venezuela in the French school, and so it's a very different setting than American school.
Yeah.
We don't. Our soccer, our PE area was a parking lot, right? So it's a very different experience.
So if we were to survey all your classmates, they wouldn't have said that you were the most talkative or least likely to come to school on time?
No, I think we were all very close knit. I don't think that. I don't know. I don't know what they would. Right. I'm still in touch with like a majority of the people, and they're all over the world because it was an international school. But I don't know what they would say. I think maybe good friends.
Okay, Tobias, what were you known for?
Well, it's an interesting way to ask the question. I can't recall being voted most likely to anything, but if there was sort of a vote like that, or if I was nominated, I'd probably be the most likely to put somebody to sleep talking about some arcane public policy question.
Did you play basketball in high school?
I did as a freshman, and I made up for my height with my inability to jump and my glacial speed. As a rower in college, that was fun.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you both for coming in. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you for the opportunity. I wish you well. Thank you.
Yeah, you too.